Hello, everyone, and welcome to this installment, of the Lum Fellows Reading Series. Bettina Love will be speaking, and Derecka Purnell will be introducing her. Derecka Purnell is a lawyer, writer, and organizer. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and training in community based organizations through an abolitionist framework. She is a visiting scholar at the Columbia Law School, and she's also the author of the recently published and highly successful Becoming Abolitionists, Police, Protests, and the Pursuit of Freedom. Welcome, Derecka Purnell.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello to everyone. I have the pleasure, honor, all of the amazing words to fill in of introducing Dr. Bettina Love. Dr. Love is an award-winning author and the Athletic Association Endowed Professor at the University of Georgia. Her writing, research, teaching, and educational advocacy work meet at the intersection of education reform, anti-racism, carceral studies, abolition, and most excitingly, Black joy. She is an often sought after public speaker on a range of topics, including abolitionist teaching, anti-racism, hip hop education, Black girlhood, queer youth, hip hop feminism, art-based education. And this isn't listed in her bio, but I would include LeBron James and Beyonce. She is the author of the books, one of which we're discussing today, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Education and Freedom, and also Hip Hop's Little Sister Speak, Negotiating Hip Hop Identities and Politics in the New South. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, and we're so excited to have her in conversation today. Welcome, Dr. Love.
You already know, you've already said two people that I just can't even live my life without, and to be here with you is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Thank you so much, Hutchinson, for having us. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm a radical LeBron hater. So it's because of our mutual love for Beyonce that keeps our bond afloat. So I'm happy that we get to talk about that today. We get to talk about abolition teaching today instead of basketball, because it might get a little heated. And yeah, thank you for the invitation. I mean, it was very exciting returning to this book, especially in this moment right now. So I can only imagine how that's been for you. I don't want to put you on blast, but you said something in the waiting room before it started that just made my mouth hit the desk. And so what year did this book come out? When did this book come out?
2019.
2019, right? And how many Zoom events did you do last year just for the book?
I did 111 Zoom events for this book last year.
Okay,
yeah.
I don't know if you gamble, but you got to run that number someplace because there are a lot of Zoom events for a lot of different reasons, and that people are especially excited about abolition teaching and your work, I think just makes all the sense to celebrate and put money on. So I think you should take that all the way to the bank.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So do you mind if we hop in the conversation?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So rereading the text, the first thing that struck me was your decision to describe people of color as dark, right? It's all throughout the text. And right now, especially, we're seeing people negotiate. What do we call ourselves? How do we identify, right? There's Black, there's BIPOC now. There was another one I saw the other day, there BICOPA, right? There's so many different, I know. There's so many different terms that people use to describe people who are oppressed, people who are navigating the system, people who weren't born Black, but were made Black, right? Who were made Hispanic because of colonialism and racism and white supremacy. But throughout your text, you describe people who are non-white, and that's another phrase, as dark. And I'm very curious about your decision to do so.
Yeah, well, before I answer that question, I did want to pull over. I want to just give a warm thank you and appreciation, not only to just the Hutchinson Center, but the folks at the Hutchinson Center. This book would have not come without them. Really quick story. I got the fellowship. I was the NAS fellow. Big shout out to Dr. Morgan and Hip Hop Archives. And I came to Hutchinson Center to write a book on hip hop civics. And so what the fellowship allowed me to do was interview all of these activists around hip hop civics. So I got to interview Leon Ford. I interviewed Charlene Carruthers. I interviewed and met with Lisa Garza. I got a chance to interview Philip Agnew. Like I interviewed Niall. Like I was in the streets with everybody. I was having a good time, and they were talking abolition. And I was like, man, you from Rochester, New York? You know abolition? What you doing? And so I was 55 pages into writing a book on hip hop civics, and being at the archive and getting the opportunity to read and digest and read and digest, and having such a wonderful, beautiful experience with my peers who were there, Regina Bradley, I just scrapped that book and I started writing this book. And I don't think it would have happened without the space, the intellectual push, without what the archive, what the Hutchinson Center has created. So I'm just very grateful to Krishna and Abby and all the folks there for the opportunity that they gave me to really push my thinking and understanding. And the reason that is right, because that's where I read so much Du Bois. And Du Bois is where I got the idea of dark from, right? He says, you know, he says, you know, what do we want? What is this thing we are after? We want to be Americans, full-fledged Americans with all the rights of American citizens, but is that all? Do we simply want to be Americans? Once in a while, through all of us, some flash, some clairvoyance, some clear idea of what America really is. We who are dark can see America in a way that white Americans cannot, and see in our country, thus are we satisfied with this present goals and ideas. Du Bois says this, and when I read that over and over and over again, I couldn't believe, like, this idea of dark. And for me, what it meant, because he was talking about art in this piece, but what it meant for me, oftentimes I wanted a word. You know, I don't really like people of color.
Yes.
I don't really like people of color. When you say Black, right, that's Black Americans or that's Black immigrants. And also, there's so much colorism within Black folks and Black communities and Latin American folks. I was like, what is a term that will put us all together, that you can't come with no colorism. You can't come with, you know, I'm Black, but I'm from Nigeria. You dark. I don't care if you light skinned, light, bright, damn near white. You dark when it comes. Like, so I wanted something that really encapsulated like who we are, and to say that being dark is beautiful. To be dark, to be Black is beautiful. And so when I read that by Du Bois, it really just set it off to this idea that, and how do we embrace as Black people, as dark people, the idea of darkness as a place of light, as a place of justice. So that's really where it came from, is I wanted to use the words of Du Bois. And also, what I really tried to do in the book, and sometimes I stumbled over it, was trying to say, I'm talking about dark people. Yeah. Talking about Black folks. I'm talking about white folks. I'm talking about Native American folks. I'm talking about my Latinx brothers and sisters. So I was trying in the book to constantly, because we all are under oppression, but it's not all the same. It all plays out on our bodies differently. So I wanted to try to use these terms in a way in which to differentiate, but also have the intersectionality. So I was just trying to play with a lot of stuff. So that word dark really it stuck with me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it stuck with me. And even, you know, I read Du Bois, even reading, you know, Malcolm, you know, discovering what Black means in the dictionary, all this association with darkness. It was actually the contrast, right? That darkness was in contrast to this thing called white supremacy. That I'm used to, you know, light driving out darkness, but here we have darkness driving out white supremacy. And I thought that was just a really, really beautiful way to challenge my own assumptions around color and how we identify as people of color, as Black people, BIPOC, African American, Negroes, you know, all of that, all of the above. I think darkness does an interesting, it's like politically aesthetic in a way that I really appreciated reading over and over again throughout the book. So now that you have pulled all these groups together under this banner of darkness, what was your purpose in writing this book?
So I had a lot of things were going through my mind when I was writing this book. Number one, I was mad. right? I'm writing this book 2015, 2016, we're in election season.
Right.
So I'm pissed off. Then I find myself having arguments with a lot of folks around how do we write for white teachers? This very idea that they have our babies, they're in classroom with our babies, and we can't tell them how we feel. We can't say what's on our minds. That really pissed me off. Like when I was seeing a lot of stuff come out that was catering to white teachers, but catering to them, but not talking about whiteness, not talking about white supremacy, not talking about carcerality, not talking about, it was just like, this is, you do this, and then you're culturally relevant. You do this, and you do these 8 things, and then I'm like, hold on, there's no checklist to this. There has to be something different. Then I was hanging out with all these abolitionists doing this project. And then I'm a hip hop scholar at heart, right? That's my baby. Like hip hop is my thing.
Okay.
That's my culture. And the thing about hip hop is you always want to put your city on. Like that's the thing about hip hop. It's always about your city. Like where are you from? You want to rep where you from. You want people to know where you from.
Yes. And
I was like, I'm from New York. I got some New Yorkers on the line. I see you, Demara's done. So I got, so upstate New York, we get a bad rap. They call us Bamas up there. We country up there. But I was like, I grew up on Seward Street, which is 1.7 miles from where Frederick Douglass grew up, where his last home. I grew up about 4 miles from where he wrote the North Star. I grew up about 5 miles from where he is buried. And growing up as a little kid in upstate New York, Rochester, New York, all you hear is the word abolition. On the July 4th, we read, right, what is July 4th to a slave? That's the embodiment of what it means to grow up there. I grew up where there are still safe houses from the Underground Railroad. And so I wanted to say, like, how do I talk about this city that I love? Anybody knows me, I will talk about Rochester like it's Wakanda. And then folks come to Rochester like, what is she talking about? This ain't Wakanda. To me, It is Wakanda. Like, I adore where I grew up and how I grew up. And so I wanted something that linked and talked about the community that loved me, the community that cared for me, the community of Black folks and Black mamas and how they took care of me. And so I wanted to put all of that in the book. But what I wanted to do more than anything is I wanted 2 things to happen. I wanted Black folks to feel seen. Yeah. So when anybody comes up to me and says, I've been saying the same thing, that's the biggest compliment as a writer I think anybody can give me. Like, you in my head. Like, I've been listening. That means you listening and you reading. So I wanted Black folks to feel seen. And the other thing I really wanted is I wanted white folks to hear what we had to say about them. In a really I didn't want to cut any corners. I wanted them to know, like, this is what we're saying. This is how we feel. And you either pick it up or you don't. So even like the cover of the book with a little Black boy, that's intentional. Yeah. It was all trying to say, if you read it, you read it. If you don't, but this isn't for you, but I hope you get something out of it. And I've been very appreciative that so many folks have picked up the book and are seeing themselves in the book as Black folks, as queer folks, as Native American folks, as Latinx folks. I'm like, dark folks. That feels so good. And then for white folks to feel uncomfortable with the book. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Shout out to Frederick Douglass. Like, just Frederick Douglass, honestly, is slept on a lot. Like a lot. In that speech, he has this part where he calls into question this idea of humanity. He says, people are basically saying, white people don't see Black people as human, but there are more crimes that are punishable by death if you're Black than if you're white. So certainly they know that we have some humanity. They expect us to know the law. I said, Frederick, what you just said? Shut your mouth. Break it down. Yes. Like, don't you know that's a bird? You know that's a bird in the sky? You know that's that. You know how you don't know I'm human. Oh, all of a sudden you're not human. Yes. He breaks that thing down. Yes. And I love that so much because it just pushes back on this idea of what it would take, right? Not to just live up to expectations of what it means to be a Black student or a Black education in the eyes of like a white person, right? That's insufficient towards our liberation. And I think you speak to that so beautifully, especially when you talk about transitioning from being at a Catholic school, right? And then going to a place and having Black teachers for the first time. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yes, so my little butt got kicked out of Catholic school. I was just running them nuns crazy. They were like, you know what, you can just, you can go. And I thought I was going to go to public school and do them same type of games. Like I thought I was going to go to public school and run the games that I was running. And then I encountered Miss Johnson. And I had never seen, first, my family, my mother and father are Southern. So my mother's family's from South Carolina, my father's family from Jacksonville, Florida, but I grew up in upstate New York. But this lady was from Louisiana, and she just had this Southernness that I was just drawn to. And she was tall, she was skinny, she had braces, I needed braces. Like she was, I was like a reflection looking at myself 20 years down the line. And then she was so tough and so stern and so loving. And I distinctly remember being a kid saying to myself, oh, those things it's over. Like, don't even try it. Like, don't even try it with her. And I just started to become a student. I just started to take on education. I just, my mother and father were working class. They were from the mindset, I send you to school to do a job. I don't have to check up on you. So nobody was checking up on me. Not that my parents didn't care. They instilled in me, I sent you to school to do your job. So I'm assuming you're doing your job. Why do I need to check up on you? If I need to come to that school, that's the problem. And so I knew my parents operated like that. So I got away with a lot in Catholic school. But when I went to public school, and there were so many kids who were just bright and thoughtful and rapping and singing and having a good time and cracking jokes. And I was like, yo, this is where it's at. And I just loved it. And it was just Black. And my teachers were Black. And I saw myself, I think for the first time, as a little Black girl who could be smart, as a little Black girl who could come to class and not get attention for cracking jokes, but get attention for being smart. Not get attention for being a behavior issue, but get attention because I had something to say. Right. And Miss Johnson, and then the next year I had Mr. Clayton, which is my first Black male teacher.
He said, hey, I know it's closed if you're gonna come into this class.
And he was tall and skinny. And it's funny, he had like these crooked hands, like I have, like he had these crooked hands. And he would call us all by our last name. My last name is Love, so I was like, I'm chilling. And he one day saw me playing. I was just starting to play basketball. And like you said, I came to school, I was coming to school dirty. My parents didn't even know, because I was one of those latchkey kids. I knew to leave the house when G.I. Joe went off. That's how I knew the time. And so my mother and father had no clue what I was doing. And I would be out there playing, this Rochester, New York, in the slush, rain. And I would just come to school in the same clothes. And Mr. Clayton one day said, Love, come here, let me talk to you. Do your parents know that you're out here playing in the morning? No. And what I love that he said, I don't want you to stop playing. He didn't even tell me to tell my parents. He just said, bring a change of clothes and iron them. Don't come in my classroom dirty anymore. And I've been
dapper
ever since. I've been dapper ever since. My friends call me Speedies. I iron everything now. Everything. I iron t-shirts. I iron everything. But it was that moment that this Black man saw me playing basketball, didn't stop me, but told me, you got to get your together to be in this class. You are a young Black girl. And it was profound the way he spoke to me that day, and I'll never forget it. And I've been dapper ever since. Dapper. Yes. I would ask you to stand up, but I'm not going to do that.
What I am going to do, actually, I was going to ask this question now, but thinking about the juxtaposition of your teachers, right? These two Black teachers that you come into me, come to love, come to respect, come to see as a reflection of yourself. And I'm thinking about how you described what it was like for you to teach, for you to be a Black teacher. And, to describe the cohort of teachers who you're with as struggling, right, as also trying to survive, right? So Mr. Clayton probably looks like he has it all together. And then here you are now, a Black teacher in Miami, in Florida, outside Miami, because it's 40 miles of highway, whatever. And so you're just like, now you have this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sentence where you say that, you know, essentially the school was diverse, but the diversity was held up by the poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And like when I read that, I was like, yo, right. Dr. Love is like a writer, like a writer, like a certain kind of writer, because you're just able to capture very succinctly what I think a lot of people are trying to do with anti-racism work. They'll say there are people who admit that, you know, diversity isn't enough. We need genuinely anti-racism. But in that anti-racism rhetoric, right, they just, it's completely divorced from poverty or economics or capitalism or anything. It's just, we need to be better anti-racist advocates. And here you say, you have this critique of diversity, and then it's there and it's held up by poverty, right? When I think of a place like Cambridge, I was like, this is the most diverse place I ever lived. And it was because the diversity was held up by wealth, right? It was like a different kind of thing. Yep. But here in this school where these Haitian immigrants, these Guatemalan immigrants, these Black kids, all this, and it was so diverse because of the poverty. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, you know, it was, and thank you for saying that. It was an experience.
I love that line. I'm gonna be preaching that like from here on out.
And I love the way you contextualize it, because it was an experience like no other. You know, when I grew up in upstate New York, I grew up with a different type of diversity. You know, we were middle class, working class family. It was Jamaicans everywhere, Puerto Ricans everywhere. You know, we had Kodak and Xerox. So I grew up with a lot, you know, like Asian Americans. There was this diversity that was held together by the industry that was there. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with a lot of diversity. And then my father was, he drove cab, but he also worked at the airport. And so, you know, in New York, everybody gets snowed in. So my father was like, so-and-so got snowed in. He didn't even know their name. They come into the house. Like my mother, like, who is this? Like, they got snowed in. So, you know, you have somebody speak Japanese at our house and you be like, why? My mother's like, okay, whatever. So, you know, we just had that type of house. And when I got to Florida for the very first time, you know, like I'm 22, 23 years old, and I'm hearing all these different languages. I'm seeing all these different people. I'm seeing all these different beautiful skin types. I'm just in awe of it. And then I'm from New York, so I'm like, oh, we got the beach, it's Miami. And then these kids tell me I've never been to the beach. I said, huh? Yeah. How have you never been to the beach? And then I realized, oh, that's Miami. This is Homestead, Florida. Right. This is a whole different environment that I just don't know about. And so it was me trying to understand how all these different groups of people got to this place. And so much of that had to do with the economic conditions that made it possible for all these people to be in this place, and the poverty that was holding everybody together. And I think that's a diversity that we're talking about sometimes, because I think, you know, when you talk about diversity, even now, like I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's Black or white. That's it in Atlanta. Yeah. And that's not diversity. You know, but they'll say, oh, the city is so diverse. I'm like, where? Like where? Everybody lives in their segregated neighborhoods. Or, you know, New York. New York is known as this liberal bastion. New York has the most segregated public school system in the country. And so trying to think differently about how we all come together. Yeah. And what holds us together sometimes is poverty. Wow.
Yes. Speaking of segregation, I want to get to these 2 pages right quick, because you write about Brown, right? And Brown, you know, if you're in education, if you're a person of color, if you live in America, you probably have heard of Brown v. Board of Education, right? When I went to law school, I thought I was going to be an education lawyer. I'm going to be Thurgood. I'm going to be out here in these streets. And then no, right? Then you learn about the actual consequences of Brown, which I don't think actually are as widely known. And I didn't know this until I read your book. I knew it generally, but the specifics got me. You write on page 28, as school desegregated, more than 38,000 Black teachers and principals lost their jobs due to the closing of all Black schools, and the fact that white parents did not want their children taught by Black teachers. And it actually reminded me of this quote that this curator said at the Hamilton House in Miami, which is like the last standing segregation era motel in Florida. She said, through the fights for desegregation, we got what we wanted, but we lost what we had. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about the dignity and the respect and the love that you experience with the teachers, right? When you transfer schools or you got kicked out and then and then transfers, well, you know, I want to watch what happened. But, you know, when you went to a different school, and one response is just like, well, of course, no one wants to fight to keep segregated schools. But this other side, we see the impact on communities when you fight to get this thing that you think is going to save you. And you have all these just really good, robust critiques of education is not going to be the only thing to save our children. So if you can talk more about desegregation efforts, what's that's looking like, and like, how do you respond to someone who's like, well, clearly we don't want all Black schools, right? Or what is it that we should be fighting for?
Yeah, you know, I think the conversation of Brown is lost. And it's a conversation that we have to keep revisiting and coming back to. And so the one way I try to have this conversation when I talk to anybody about Brown is about Ruby Bridges, right? Ruby Bridges is a little girl in New Orleans. She's 6 years old. And you see, many people know the famous Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges. And she's standing there, right, with 4 US Marshals and her mother in tow. Now, what people don't talk about is Ruby Bridges spent 2 years by herself in that classroom. Nobody would send their child to school with her. The federal government did not want her to eat anything in that school for a fear that she would be poisoned. There was a white woman that some days when Ruby Bridges walked to school had a baby doll, a Black baby doll in a coffin, 6 years old. And so the conversation that we don't talk about is the terror, and the pain that generation went through to try to live up to this very idea of this dream. And I would ask anybody, would you give your children up? Would you give your children up? And understanding that Black children do it every single day, the sacrifices that Black parents make every single day to try to get this country to live up to the very dream of democracy. That's what this is about. We're like, Black folks are always trying to push, and we are always sacrificing ourselves and our children and the scars of trying to say, hey, we deserve the right to be in the building. We deserve the right to learn about ourselves. And think about it. Here we are 65 years after Brown, and we're fighting critical race theory again. Again. And so, you know, we lost 38,000 teachers, but what we also lost was the community, the identity, the culture, conversations, and administrators and folks who just knew us. We also lost 40, you know, what people also don't talk about. Yeah, we lost those jobs, but we lost middle-class jobs. That's a whole economic group that we just lost, gone. And so I think when we think about Brown and we think what has happened, and then the gutting of Brown. So you said Thurgood Marshall, right? The Detroit case, Milky, that pretty much guts Brown in 1974. Thurgood Marshall is on the Supreme Court when they gut Brown right before his eyes. And he writes the dissent saying, you're going to just segregate schools again. This is the evil of it.
Yeah.
But what we don't talk about is that we have about an 18, 15-year period where you see Brown work, where more Black kids are going to college, more Black kids are getting better grades, higher test scores, all of that stuff you see happen for about a 15-year period. And by 1988, all the gains of Brown are gone. And what research tells us is that those gains that were like the 15-year period, it didn't hurt white folks at all. It didn't hurt white children at all. And so I think when we think about what we have to do now, it really has to be about understanding that Brown galvanized white resistance in a way in which I don't think the NAACP ever thought it would do. Brown was a galvanizing for the North and the South. You saw segregation academies come up. You saw white flight. You saw the gutting and the erosion of public schools and public communities. You saw them come up with all new tax codes to make sure they get their schools paid for. You saw racial covenants be created so Black folks cannot buy homes. Like, they Brown galvanized them in a way in which we would say the Tea Party was galvanized after Barack Obama's election. And so like, that's kind of what I'm talking about in my new book, is like what Brown did and how it led to educational reform and this very lie of school choice. So after Brown, they give us the lie of school choice, as if Black folks really have choices after the crumbs that white folks don't want. And that's what Brown and this whole new idea of school choice opened up. And so Brown is just, I think, it's what Carol Anderson talks about in her book, White Rage, is that it's not just about the crosses burning in the street. It's not just about, the violence that we see. They will legislate their rage.
Yeah.
They will legislate it. And here we are with this critical race theory. With the matter of 4 months, you got 26 states. How 20? They will it's not just about the violence. It is how they will legislate and use the law and use covenants and use policies and use ordinance to legislate their white rage. And Brown really galvanized white folks in a way in which we had never seen before. They were always mad, but Brown brought them together. And it was a linchpin for the last 65 years of white resistance that we've seen.
Wow, just to that last point, especially around being able to legislate, right? The horrible imagination of white supremacy, right? Just literally just yesterday, I was talking to someone, I was like, imagination is really neutral. I know we romanticize it and pretend that it's something that people who believe in justice and freedom do, but police, the kind of schools we have, private, these are fixtures of someone's imagination. And if we think that we can just imagine an abolitionist future, that's not going to be enough, because those people who have the power to imagine violence, they also have the will and they have the resources. And so we need imagination, will, resources, prayer, music. We need all of that and more to combat the imagination that they have, that they can just legislate. I love that point so much. And then if you have questions, this is the audience, if you have questions, please prepare to start asking them. I'll start taking them in about 5 minutes. But just before we go to Q&A, I would actually love if you can read your passage about ed reform. Because I told you this morning, I want a whole book just based on this passage. Like, that's the book that I want to read, comparing it to criminal justice reform. So if you can read that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. On page 10, reform ain't justice. Education is an industry that is driven and financially backed by the realities that dark children and families just survive. It is Teach for America's mantra. Spend 2 years in the inner city or rural schools with poor and dark children and help them survive. Individuals with little to no experience are tasked with working with struggling schools that are designed to fail. They are underfunded, high teacher turnout, burnout, tests that push students, and low quality teachers, and are given 2 years. If they can make it long enough to quote unquote make a difference, when hundreds more qualified teachers have failed. The educational parasites need dark children to fail, which supports their feel-good, quick gimmick narrative and the financial reasons for their very existence. Education reform is big business, just like prisons. Given the narrative that dark people are criminals to justify locking them up for profit is no different from constantly reminding the American public that there is an educational achievement gap, while conveniently never mentioning America's role in creating the gap. Both prisons and schools create a narrative of public outrage and fear that dark bodies need saving from themselves. These two industries play off each other. And America believes the criminality and the low achievement go hand in hand. The 4 major testing companies, Pearson Educational Testing, McGraw-Hill, make $2 billion a year in revenue while spending $20 million a year lobbying for a more mandated student assessments. Prisons bring in $70 billion a year in revenue in an industry that spends $45 billion lobbying to keep people incarcerated for longer sentences. Educational reformers take up space in urban schools, offering nothing more than survival tactics to children of color in the forms of test-taking skills, acronyms, grit labs, character education. The barriers of racism, discrimination, concentrated poverty, and access to college. Persistent structural barriers cannot be eradicated by tweaking the system or making adjustments. We must struggle together not only to reimagine schools, but to build new schools that are taught to believe the impossible. Schools based on intersectional justice, anti-racism, love, healing, and joy. This book is about the struggle and the possibilities of coming together, committing ourselves to an abolitionist approach to educational freedom, freedom, not reform. Abolitionist teaching is built on the creative imagination, the boldness, the ingenuity, the rebellious spirit, and the methods of abolition to demand and fight for an educational system where all students are thriving, not simply surviving. I know as an educator that may seem as a daunting task, an overwhelming task, in an already taxing mission, but the courage and the vision are required. Abolitionist teaching is choosing to engage in the struggle for educational justice, knowing that you have the ability and the human right to refuse oppression and refuse oppression others, mainly your students. What does this approach look like in the educational classroom and beyond? Teachers working with communities in solidarity to address issues impacting their students and their students' communities, reimagining and rewriting the curriculum with local and national activists to provide students with not only examples of resistance, but also strategies of resistance. Mm-hmm. Protecting and standing in solidarity with immigrant children and their families, joining pro-immigrant communities and organizations to fight for all, knowing that freedom is possible without women and queer leaders being the thinkers and the doers of the abolitionist movement. Engaging in civics education that teaches direct action and civil disobedience while incorporating the techniques of the millennial freedom fighter generation, such as social media, hashtags, and online petitions. Abolitionist teaching is refusing taking part in zero tolerance policies in the school to prison pipeline, demanding restorative justice in our own schools as a school-wide and district-wide approach to improve school culture. Refusing the idea that children do not need recess and insisting that all children need to play. Abolitionist teaching ensures that students feel safe in schools and that schools are not the predators of violence toward the very students they're supposed to protect. Abolitionist teaching is calling out your fellow teachers who degrade and diminish dark children and do not think dark children matter. We must demand that they leave the profession. We have to call them out. Abolitionist teaching stands in solidarity with parents and fellow teachers opposing standardized testing, English-only education, racist teachers, arming teachers with guns, and turning schools into prisons. Abolitionist teaching supports the teachers from the space of Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter, and affirms Black folks' humanity.
Okay, where do we even start? Let's start at the beginning real quick, because this was the first time that I was able to make the connection between education reform and criminal justice reform, penal reform, in a way that was so bright and so clear that I was like, oh yeah, this is what I think some of the school to prison pipeline conversation misses, right? So, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, this incredible critical geographer, abolitionist scholar, she teaches that the prison boom in California was essentially happened because there were all of these people who were locked out of the market, right? So if you locked out of getting a job, you locked out of housing, then essentially you become a population that you can incarcerate.
Right.
And you can create an economy around incarcerating people, especially in places that don't have jobs. Now, what's incredible, Bettina, what you've done in this section, for me at least, was like, oh yeah, if our educational system as it's currently constituted isn't interested in really engaging in this radical project of like educating all of our children, well, then you can just exclude them from our schools and build a market on their exclusion. right? You can build a market on keeping them out. This is true for disability too. If we don't have to figure out how to make sure disabled people can work, we can just exclude them and build a home healthcare market or a nursing home market or any one of these other. And you make this analysis with education. You say, look at these testing companies who are banking on the failure of the inclusion of our children to this system. And now that's a market. And if we dare to actually educate and treat all children with dignity in this robust form, then what happens? They lose that market. And I was like, this is brilliant. This is so good. Give us this book. Please give us this book so bad. So if we know that reform ain't justice, as you titled this section, could you explain to us, what is abolitionist teaching? Why is that justice? What do you mean to someone who's never heard this phrase before, besides telling them to read the book? But tell me, why is that justice?
Well, abolition is not this perfect thing. And I have been on a journey. It's like becoming an abolitionist. It's a book titled that I think is a wonderful book you all should read, just came out by yours truly. But what your book does is this beautiful way of helping us become abolitionists. Like, people think, I didn't grow up an abolitionist. I grew up in upstate New York. I grew up with gangs. I grew up with violence. I grew up in the 80s. The 80s were a wild, boy. Like, that's a wild time when America's government just turns and puts a target on Black folks' back. Like, that's the 80s. They, with all intention and meticulously, put a target on Black people's back. They put drugs in our community and then incarcerate us for selling the drugs they put in our community. Like, it is a wild time in the 80s. And I grew up thinking that these individuals who are hurting our community was not the government, was not the police. I grew up thinking it was my brothers and my sisters. And so being an abolitionist, as you talk so beautifully in your book, is a journey. And so for me, I've been on this journey of thinking about punishment, of thinking about healing, of thinking about joy, of thinking about harm. And we want to talk about our schools in this country. We cannot talk about our schools without talking about punishment, right? Miriam Kaba tells us punishment is this way that's efficient. It gets it done. And we don't got to worry about it. That's public education. We know as abolitionists, our job is to constantly be thinking about, how do we do less harm? That's education, who is constantly doing harm to Black children and brown children, indigenous children, and dark children. We think about abolition as a space of imagination, of dreaming, of healing and joy. And so when you think about what abolition is trying to be, abolitionists will tell us, being an abolitionist means having one foot in this world and one foot in the world you're trying to create.
Beautiful, yeah.
And so that means when we think about education, why wouldn't we want to be abolitionists? Why wouldn't we want to reduce the harm and try to eliminate the harm in our schools? Why wouldn't we want to stop punishing individuals in our schools? Why wouldn't we want to take out the PIC in our schools? Like, what the lens that abolitionist gives us, I just felt needed to be in education, because education, like you're saying, is a part of this structure, as folks talk about, as a death dealing structure. Education is in part of that. And one way we know to take it out is through abolition. Abolition to say that we can build something better. And something better doesn't always mean new, because our ancestors have given us a playbook. So we can just go back to what we know we got as well. We can, say Copa, go ahead and catch that. So for me, abolition and abolitionist teaching is about thinking very deeply about healing, about joy, about destroying, about eliminating, about reducing and eliminating harm, and thinking very deeply about how we are obsessed with punishment within our schools, the language that we use within our schools, investigation. And, even when we talked about the pandemic, folks like, we got to have kids are going to re-entry school. Re-entry? What are we talking about? Some re-entry? The language that we use to talk about our children in school is so carceral. Or everybody's an officer, right? We have a diversity officer. You're not an officer. Why are you a leader? How are you? Who told you you were an officer? Like, the language that we use is so carceral.
I
And
know.
so,
This is a side note. I need to tell you this probably offline, but I was having a conversation with one of my middle school teachers who I loved and adored, and now she's a principal. And I was interviewing her actually for my book. And she was telling me, you know, all these kids, they get to take home tablets and have internet on them. And if I can't get in touch with their parents when I need to, I just cut them off. Cut off internet access in the home. I said, are they on probation? You sound like a probation officer. Why do you think this is okay? What happened to the person I knew was my middle school teacher, my math teacher in 7th grade, is now threatening to cut off access to internet because you
in a
can't
pan,
get
in a panty,
in a
in a panty,
in a
right?
pandemic.
I mean, you have so much language. You don't even know how many students every day taking plea deals within their schools, taking plea deals.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
Like, you want to do 3 to 5 days, or you gonna get 10? I mean, it's constantly. And so for me, it was trying to bring that energy of Kaba, of Angela Davis, of Critical Resistance, of David Stovall, of Erica Miner, of Charlene Carruthers, of you, like all these individuals that have been amazing, trying to say they are on to something. They are giving us a playbook, and that playbook is deserving and needed in education if we're ever going to think about beyond reform and get to a place of Black liberation and understanding that at the end of the day, that benefits all children. This isn't just about Black children.
Right.
If we shore up our schools and our schools become places of democracy, places of critical thinking, places of redemption, places of less punishment, places of healing, that benefits all children.
Yeah.
Right. And so trying to make that argument is really what I was trying to do. Bringing,
No, you did it. You didn't try to do it. You did it. It's done. It's done. It's done. Did. It's so past tense that it's done. It's done. You accomplished that. And you also have done what I've at least experienced very few professors do. You know, so I've seen professors write books and catalyze a center at a university. You built out an abolitionist teaching network for teachers in the real world who are teaching students right now, right? Like, come on, you didn't do a center for abolition, right? You went out and built a network of educators to do political education, to figure out how to change their relationships to students in the class, to reorient their relationships to each other and to the work, and to do that in this broader abolitionist movement. Like, it's remarkable. Can you talk more about that, please?
Yeah, ATN, we've been around 16 months maybe. We've hired 6 abolitionists out in the community doing some amazing work. We did 27 programs last year. We had a school. We have Freedom Fridays where we do healing and joy for educators, for BIPOC educators every first Friday. We had 75 students sign up for our Freedom School where we taught 4th graders and 6th graders about abolition and Black joy and community and redemption and healing. You know, what I wanted to do is, you know, before the pandemic, I was on the book tour and I'm talking to students and I'm talking to teachers, oh, I love the book, da, da, da. And then they say, well, Dr. Love, what's next?
Right.
I say, well, organize. That's what we organize. They look at me like, no. That's what's next is organizing. And then I also wanted to say, you know, this is a book that I wrote between 2016 and 2018, right? It's 2 years of my life. I've thought so differently about abolition ever since. I've grown so much since. I've made mistakes. I've done harm, right? And so I wanted something that kept living. And that's where, you know, ATN came out. So my wife and our co-founders and the board, we're just trying to keep pushing the ideas of abolition and really pushing the ideas that our schools and our teachers have to put joy and healing and think about the harm and understand our obsession with punishment and trying to teach that to teachers and getting them connected with activists so they can do that work in their communities. So ATN, you know, I always say ATN saved me. ATN was a project from the heart, and I'm just so thankful that, you know, we have done so much in just 16 months, and we have failed and we've made mistakes, and we're trying to learn from those mistakes every day. I would say the biggest thing for us, like, what does it mean to be an abolitionist nonprofit? That's attention.
Yeah. Yes,
what does it mean
absolutely.
to be an abolitionist organization that has employees and has evaluations? What does it mean to be Like we are, so now we're trying to think through like these really big questions around abolition and organizing and organizational structures. Like what is an abolitionist organizational structure? I don't know. So those are the big questions that we are trying to really grapple with right now as an organization, because I think it's important, because what we know is that if abolition and justice and equity is not in your policies, then it's not real.
Right.
So yeah, ATN is it's my baby. It's everything. I'm really proud of what we've done. I'm proud of how we are trying to handle our mistakes, and I'm proud of all the teachers who have joined us. And even we had you on a panel this summer for our first conference.
Amazing.
We had 450 people at our first conference. We raised $100,000 in 2 days, and then we'll give it all back out. So anybody listening, we're in our ATN gives out grants. October 25th, we start our grant season, and we give out grants to teachers, formerly incarcerated educators, queer educators, disability educators, single moms, warriors, youth. So we give out the money. So as soon as we get it in, we give it back out. I make nothing. And so I love saying that, so much around justice is built on the backs of abolitionists and community folks and organizers. Who takes care of them? Who makes sure they eating? Who pays their bills? We need them to do that work, but we got to take care of them as well. And so ATN was really birthed out of a teacher at my wife's school who passed away. She had pneumonia.
Oh man.
And just kept working and just kept working and just kept working, didn't take care of herself. And my wife and I were just torn up about that. So a lot of ATN is trying to heal and do work for Black and Brown teachers.
Yeah. So y'all can thrive.
Mm-hmm.
You can thrive. Wow, that's beautiful. Yes, are there any questions in the audience? You can raise your hand using the function, the hand raising function.
While the audience is gathering their thoughts, Derecka, why don't you tell us a little bit about your new book?
Oh, yep. I would prefer not to, because this is about Bettina's incredible book.
Perhaps how it dovetails with Bettina's work.
Yeah, so I wrote a book. It came out last Tuesday. It's called Becoming an Abolitionist, Police Protest and the Pursuit of Freedom. What does it do? It does a lot of different things. One, it essentially shows how a generation of activists who were fighting for criminal justice reform, and quite frankly, the arrest and imprisonment of people like George Zimmerman in the wake of Trayvon Martin, how that generation come to shift to be calling for the end of the entire carceral state. And so it gives a history of police, not just emerging from slave patrols, but emerging from the resistance to slavery in the first place. It talks about violence. What about the murderers? What about sexual assault? It talks about disability justice and climate justice, and how all these intersecting fights for freedom, where abolition, I think, makes important interventions and what abolitionists can continue to learn, and invites people to think critically about abolition with other people and to hopefully join or support an organization that's doing freedom work like ATN.
I read the book. It's amazing.
Thank you.
It's absolutely amazing. If anybody is listening, you are the abolitionists of our time. You are really just.
Let's not do superlatives.
I'm doing superlatives. So we met at Harvard. My time at Harvard is where we met.
I'm gonna go to Maria. I think that is. We're gonna just skip over this right now. Am I saying your name right, Maria? Yes. Please unmute yourself. Here you go.
Got it. Hey y'all, my name's Maria. Thank you so much, Dr. Love, for being here today. I got your book as a graduation present this summer, so that was definitely very lovely. And basically what my question is your comment about how rage gets legislated really stood out to me, because a lot of my work right now, and part of the reason why that led me to Harvard, is I want to do culturally responsive trauma-informed policy. Particularly being very race conscious, but I'm having a hard time, I think, as an aspiring policy practitioner, moving the needle from legislating rage and frustration to legislating empathy and healing. So I wanted to ask what your advice would be as somebody who's looking forward to doing this work, but is basically facing everything that your book touches on.
Oh, that's a really great question. And thank you for the work that you're doing. That brings me back to one of my favorite quotes by Dr. King. Dr. King said, policy can't change hearts and minds, but it will stop the hearts. That's what I'm all, policy, policy, policy. So even when you're like these folks are resistant to this, these folks are not listening to this, we have to be able to use the same tools that they use. And that is through legislation, that is through policy. And we're using it not as revenge, we're using it for democracy. And so I would say, you know, the work has to be deeply embedded with, yes, I think we put too much of the work in trying to change hearts and minds and not enough in the work in trying to change the systems. Because I can't depend on you changing your heart and mind. Because what if you change it back? So we gotta be able to weaponize the way in which they have weaponized policy and law and those type of things. So when I hear you say, you know, pushing for that, push for that. Don't get discouraged, because at the end of the day, real change is going to happen in so many different ways. There is no one way change is going to happen. Everybody's going to play a role in it. Everybody. And we need everybody to play their part. And so if everybody plays their part, oh, we get this thing done. We get it done beautiful. We get it done fast. We get it done in a way in which, and when I mean fast, I mean like 200 years, but that's still fast. Because we done did already 400 in this thing. So I would say to you, just keep going and push in a way in which that tries to do the hearts and mind thing, yes, but also we are going towards policy. We are going towards legislation. That has to be the key.
Yes, I'm gonna go to T. Malik next. The only thing I'll add to that is that if you're trying to legislate healing and empathy, I like my healing and empathy with a little side of reparations. And so if you can just add that to the order, that would be fantastic. All right, I'm gonna go to T. Malik. I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Oh, no worries. It's Ty Malik.
Ty Malik.
No
Sorry.
Yeah, everybody goes with T. Mine is just really a gratitude statement. I am a teaching artist in Baltimore, and I was hired to co-facilitate some workshops for other teaching artists, and it's around like how to teach Black kids better. And we were able to censor your book in that process. And so we did about 6 3-hour workshops just breaking down the book and everything else. And it was a mix of like Black, brown, white teachers. And I'm really grateful for how you laid everything out. And one, it made my job easy. And two, it was what you said. It was like this, if y'all have ever been in an anti-racist training, 3 hours of that sounds frustrating. But because we centered joy in it, it was like at the end of 3 hours, people just wanted to stay on. And we had right after that, we did a summer program. It was with a larger organization called Young Audiences of Maryland. And the changes that we saw and just like the interactions with the students and like how teachers were just feeling like they could be disruptors because the system is so big. And so our focus was, what can you do in your center of control? Like, what can you do in your classroom? What can you do with your interactions? Like, how can you bring in some abolitionist teaching to where you're at? And what do you need to disrupt in yourself? And there was so much disruption. There was so much discomfort, but people just kept with it. And we kept like reminding them of the joy of it. And I just want to say you had such a huge impact on me as a teaching artist, on a lot of teaching artists in Baltimore. And you are very loved. So just thank you for your work.
Oh, I don't even know what to say. Kristen, we were talking about this before we got started. Thank you so much for that, T. I really appreciate it. And I love it because, you know, I think people think anti-racism sometimes mean like we're going to talk about power and trauma and pain. It's like, yeah, but we can talk about Black people's joy, Black people's humanity, who we are. Because if you know who Black people are, then you know we don't need saving. We don't. All you need to do is remove the barriers. Don't worry about us. Don't worry about us. We are, look at us. And so that joy piece is so critical for me because I want our students to know who they are and what we have done and how we have resisted. And I think too often we think anti-racism means we're going to teach about George Floyd. We're going to teach about Trayvon Martin. Yes, okay. But that's what's been done to me. That ain't my history. Oh, we are a mighty people, as Marcus Garvey would say. So to hear you say that just brings me so much joy because that was such part of the book, is trying to say this work has to be about joy, has to be about love and creativity. So Shout out to the teachers in Baltimore. Shout out to you. And thank y'all so much. I know we're at the end of time, so I just want to give a big shout out again to the Hutchinson Center for having us, for Christian and Abby and all the amazing work they do, Dr. Morgan for all the amazing work. And I know she can't cut my mic off right now. Derecka, you are amazing.
It was too easy. It was honestly too easy because it was actually the one time where I could do it. So I just had to try. I'm so sorry. It was.
This how little sisters treat you. See how they treat you? This how little sisters treat you. Get her book, buy her book. Utterly amazing human being that I have been amazed with and enamored for since we met at Harvard. So thank you so much for doing this. And thank y'all so much for having me back. I appreciate y'all. And everybody at home, stay safe, 2 masks. And I hope to see y'all on the other side of this, man.
I'm just going to say one thing. I'm going to take this opportunity. Hey, Bettina. Derecka, thank you so much for joining us today. And Bettina, love, you are astounding. My heart is racing. So glad to have you here. And I just want to say that I've been at the Hutchinson Center for a long time, and I can honestly say there's no fellow who has changed my thinking as much as you have. You're so present to me. I think about, I don't know if you remember, but I do. We had a conversation in my office after your colloquium at my little table about empathy. And you said, empathy is not enough. And you just transformed my thinking about education, about everything. And I have carried that lesson with me. And I just so appreciate your being here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Derecka. I'm getting your book too. I ordered Bettina's. Why I haven't had it before, I don't know. I ordered it while you were talking. I'm about to order Derecka's now too. So thank you both.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Love, I know you have another meeting and you're too kind to say that you're late for another meeting. So I'm going to pass it back to Krishna and then we can wrap.
Yeah, thank you both for a very stimulating, inspiring session. And my words are not enough to encompass what you've done today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Be well, everyone.